2 dead, 2 critically injured, an assassination attempt. In Pennsylvania last night, politics truly became a matter of life and death. On the eve of being anointed the Republican candidate for president, Donald Trump survives an attempt on his life. The political world unites in shock and condemnation. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips, and a very different programme today as we bring you the breaking news of an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Shots were fired towards the former president during the rally, piercing part of his right ear. He was rushed to safety, but is said to be doing well. A spectator was killed, and 2 people remain in a critical condition. The FBI has named the alleged gunman who was shot on the scene as 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks. This morning, the political world is united in horror, and there are no words that can capture the shock of what we saw in Pennsylvania last night. But the attempt to assassinate Donald Trump is not a one-off. I first came to politics 60 years ago as a child, seeing my mother weeping after the shooting of John F. Kennedy. Most attempts of the lives of politicians we never learn about because they're thwarted by police and security services. But our democracy depends on the courage of men and women who put themselves at risk for the burden of office. And in spite of the recent murders of Joe Cox and David Amos, thousands in this country have just spent weeks running exactly that risk. We should never stop scrutinising them. But every now and then, we should pause and say to our political representatives and those who protect them, as Americans do often, thank you for your service. Let's speak live to our US correspondent now, Mark Stone, who's at the scene in Pennsylvania. Mark, bring us up to date, please.
Morning, Trevor. Well, it's just gone 3:30 in the morning here in Butler, Pennsylvania. We're just north of Pittsburgh in the far west, I should say, of one of America's largest states, a swing state, a place where the election will be fought hard, very hard. But last night, something extraordinary happened. This field in Pennsylvania will now always be known as the place where a former president was almost assassinated. And it really was a very, very close call. Look at the images here. You can see Donald Trump just moments after a flurry of bullets, one of them hitting his ear. That is how close it was. He released a statement shortly afterwards saying that he could feel the bullet whooshing past his ear. The gunman was on a roof outside the area of the rally itself. Just over my shoulder there, that's where the rally took place. Beyond that, on the left-hand side, that is where there is a building, an adjacent building, and on top of that building, the 20-year-old man with a automatic weapon was fired several shots. You can see the building there, and those shots rained down on those who were at the rally. One person died, 2 people are in a very serious condition. Donald Trump himself is not in a serious condition, injured, as you saw, whisked away very quickly by the Secret Service, who, Trevor, clearly did a very good job in the aftermath. It looks almost textbook. He drops to the floor. As a former president, he would know what the protocol would be when something like this happens. But they quickly surround him, on top of him, shielding him, get him off the stage, into the car and away. But what happened before, that is what will now be the subject of a very, very difficult investigation. How was a shooter allowed to be so close to the president, about 150 metres away, not inside the cordon itself, but close enough to create this extraordinary moment, an extraordinary moment for America. and I wonder what the political consequences of this will be. Very serious indeed, I'm sure, Trevor.
We'll come on to the political consequences, but Mark, I was listening to your commentary on it because you were on the phone straight after it happened, and it seems an extraordinary piece of fortune that he appeared to turn literally at the moment when the shots rang out, and then I think we heard shots of a different caliber, which I suspect was the Secret Service returning fire. Literally, it's a hair's breadth that stopped this being a killing rather than shot through the ear.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was all being streamed live on cable news here. His speeches are very often. This one was. It's a key one as well, because there was an expectation that he might use the speech to announce who his vice presidential candidate would be. And it was only 5 or 6 minutes into the speech, streamed live, that suddenly everything changed and this began to unfold. And as you say, if he had been literally that far over, he would have been shot dead, without question. I mean, that is how close it was. Absolutely extraordinary. And many questions now. Questions for the Secret Service, how this man was allowed to get so close. I've been to so many Trump rallies over the years, and some of them are huge. Some of them are on airstrips, or in stadiums. This was a slightly smaller rally. Butler is a pretty rural place to the north of Pittsburgh. A smaller rally, an open field. You can't see it now, of course, because it's dark, but an open field. But within those rallies, you have to go through airport-style security. But beyond them, you don't. But those areas should still be swept, and usually they are. But for some reason, this building, 150 metres away from where the president was talking, had not been swept, or if it was, they missed something. And this 20-year-old man was able to climb up to the top of the building, broad daylight, take aim and take those shots. As you say, you can hear the difference in the caliber between his shots and then the returning fire from the Secret Service, who were there. And we've seen images of them on a higher point near where Donald Trump was. They returned fire very, very quickly and took out the gunman. But big questions for the Secret Service. Questions, too, about who this man was. What was his motive? What is his political affiliation? A suggestion today that actually he was aligned to the Republican Party. So big questions there. And of course, was he acting alone? It is the Republican National Convention about to begin tomorrow. One of the biggest moments in the political calendar here in the United States. That is the point at which Donald Trump was due to announce his vice presidential running mate. I think that convention will take on a very different tone right now. It will change in terms of security, and I think the rhetoric from those at the convention, from those at the top of the Republican Party, will sharpen, no doubt.
Mark, thank you so much. And on the Secret Service, remarkable to see those men and women put their bodies in between the shooter and President Trump. We'll no doubt hear more from you during the day. Thank you so much. President Biden was briefed in the moments following the shooting, and he then spoke to the nation. Here's what he said.
I've been thoroughly briefed by all the agencies in the federal government as to the situation, based on what we know now. I have tried to get a hold of Donald. He's with his doctors. Apparently he's doing well. I plan on talking to them shortly, I hope, when I get back to the telephone. Look, there's no place in America for this kind of violence. It's sick. It's sick. It's one of the reasons why we have to unite this country. We cannot allow for this to be happening. We cannot be like this. We cannot condone this. And I want to thank the Secret Service and all the agencies, including the state agencies, that have been engaged in making sure that the people and we have more detail to come relative to other people maybe injured in the audience. I don't have all that detail. We'll make that available to you. I may be able to come back a little later tonight, but we'll put out a statement if I'm not able to if it's not convenient for you all. But the bottom line is that the Trump rally was a rally that he should have been able to be conducted peacefully without any problem. But the idea that there's political violence or violence in America like this is just unheard of. It's just not appropriate. And everybody must condemn it. Everybody. I'll keep you informed, and if I am able to speak to Donald, I'll let you know that as well. But so far, it appears he's doing well, number one. Number two, that they're thoroughly investigating what happened to anyone else in the audience. We have some reports, but not final reports. And every agency in the federal government, I'm going back to my phone to speak with the federal agencies that are being put together again to give me an updated briefing. Has anything happened? They learned any more in the last couple hours. So thank you very much, and I hope I get to speak to them tonight, and I'll get back to you if I do. Okay?
Mr. President, do you think this was an assassination attempt?
I don't know enough to. I have an opinion, but I don't have any facts. So I want to make sure we have all the facts before I make any more comments. Thank you.
Well, that was President Joe Biden. And now my Times colleague, Tom Newton-Dunn, was at the former president's rally in Pennsylvania, and he can speak to us live from there. Good morning, Tom. How close were you?
I was about 50, 60 metres from the stage. It was a big open fairground, as Mark was just reporting there. It wasn't an arena. It looked like a baseball pitch, really. There were steel fences around the outside, a big stage for Donald Trump with all the usual stars and stripes behind him, and a couple of barns behind that where we could clearly see from the crowd Secret Service snipers up on the roofs trying to protect him. So I was pretty close. I have to tell you, Trevor, the extraordinary thing was, it was a carnival atmosphere. Trump rallies, you've seen them already, you might have been to them. They're great things of fun for Trump supporters. They love this guy. They love coming to see him for hundreds of miles around. And they were out trying to enjoy a fun Saturday afternoon.
So at what moment did you actually become aware that something had happened? Because a lot of people, eyewitnesses, said that first they thought there were some firecrackers or something.
Yeah, it was about 5 minutes into Trump's speech. He was late. He's always late for these sorts of things. He should have been on stage at 5 p.m. He came on at just 5 minutes past 6. The crowd didn't mind at all. They were very pleased to see him. There were a lot of thank you, Trump chants as he came on stage, and there was the usual routine. He started getting into it. We've heard his speeches before. He went into immigration first, and he was just making a point on immigration, leaning forward on the lectern, which is potentially how he managed to save his own life. Quite extraordinary, as Mark has just described to you. And just as he was making that point, 4 or 5, maybe 6 sort of cracks we heard. There was a small pause and then another 3 or 4 more cracks. And it was that cracks, that was the gunfire. Now, when you hear gunfire never sounds like gunfire. It could be anything. It could have been firecrackers. And you don't know if you're at this sort of event. You don't expect this to happen. So I think a lot of us thought, is this a stunt? Is this a prank by someone? And it took a few seconds, really, of quietness, eerie quietness, really, for it to dawn on all of us that this was indeed high-velocity rounds winging through over thousands of people's heads and hitting people, almost hitting the former president, hitting people behind him. And that's really when the terror struck in. People shouted immediately, get down, get down. So we all jumped to the ground, got up on our knees 20, 30 seconds later. I think we all wanted to see what had happened to Donald Trump. Eventually he rose again, and I was looking for any signs of blood on his white shirt. There was none, and he gave that fisted salute you just saw there. So he was okay. But pandemonium then broke loose. The Secret Service tried to clear us out very quickly. There was a lot of shouting. A lot of women were in tears. A lot of men quite angry, getting very, very angry, blaming Joe Biden, blaming CNN, some really quite strong and, dare I say, preposterous things. But, they were furious, and they thought it was the other side that did it. And that events like this are going to make people angry, and hopefully it's just in the initial stages of the event they're saying things which I really hope they don't mean.
Were you aware that at the time that other people there had been hit? We now know that at least one person in the audience has died, and there are 2 people who are critically injured.
Yeah, we knew pretty quickly. I was slightly to the right of the crowd, pretty much in the middle of the crowd to the right. The shots came from the left, from a warehouse building some 500 or so yards away. I was funneled out to the right and immediately saw, just behind the stage, if you like, first Donald Trump's motorcade pulling off at considerable speed with outriders and sirens blaring, as you can see there. But just in front of a few feet, really, from where Donald Trump was getting in to his vehicle, there were medics working on someone very seriously on the ground, someone quite seriously injured, obviously. Bandages had come out. You saw the normal plastic gloves you see in these sorts of critical moments. An ambulance had pulled up, but they didn't want to get the person into the ambulance. They were still busy trying to perhaps save their lives then and there on the ground. So it was quite obvious, I think, really within a few minutes. Something very, very serious and horrendous had happened.
Tom, part of what I guess now happens is the reaction. And one part of it, presumably, is a response to Trump's own reaction, which is extraordinary. The fist bump, I think we can see him saying, fight, fight, fight. What was the response of the crowd there to that moment?
They were pleased, relieved, quite frankly, all of us were, journalists, spectators, Trump supporters, to see he was alive and to see that he hadn't been killed. No one wants to see human life taken, certainly not in front of their own eyes. So the crowd was pleased. They responded to Trump's fist bump. I think the words he was saying were fight, fight, and the crowd couldn't hear that because the microphones were off by that stage, but they were cheering him. As they left I suppose, immediate jubilation that their guy hadn't been murdered in front of their eyes, passed into either terror, hysteria, upset, anger, a whole wave of human emotions. Some leaving the rally itself were threatening retribution. There was a mobile signboard, one of those mobile billboards outside the rally. Within an hour or so, they'd mocked up a crosshairs on Trump's face with the words, "Democrats try to assassinate Trump." Probably a very unhelpful suggestion altogether. And others have also reacted. I think, Trevor, this is going to be absolutely fascinating. You know, it's the middle of the night now. It's 3:30 in the morning here. America is in shock, undoubtedly. Lethal political violence has now returned to this country. John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. His brother, Bobby Kennedy, in 1968. Martin Luther King, as well, you mentioned. Ronald Reagan was shot in 1981. And this is it. It's back again. And J.D. Vance, the guy who we all thought perhaps Donald Trump was going to announce as his vice president, he tweeted in the immediate aftermath that the Democrats are to blame. Highly inflammatory. Donald Trump, though, however, yes, he did that fist bump, but his words since have been really quite measured, saying nothing about the Democrats who are to blame, merely expressing his sympathy for the loss here. And Joe Biden there in that clip, calling Trump Donald, it felt like an important moment to me. This is a pivotal moment for America. Do they come together? Do they end this incredibly awful, polarized election debate? Although, do they go ever further apart? And I don't think we know that.
Tom, thank you so much for that Eyewitness report. Stay safe. Prime Minister Keir Starmer said he's shocked by the scenes at President Trump's rally in Pennsylvania, condemns all forms of political violence in the strongest terms. He offered his best wishes to Donald Trump and his family. Now, we can get more reaction from the government. A little earlier, I spoke to the leader of the House of Commons, Lucy Powell. Lucy Powell, your reaction to events in the United States overnight?
Well, this is an appalling, horrific attack on Donald Trump, which we fully and completely condemn. There is no place for political violence. There are no place for attacks like this in our democracy, and the Prime Minister has already sent his thoughts to Donald Trump and his family and all those involved. This is absolutely appalling.
To what extent do you think our politicians, you, are vulnerable in this way?
Well, clearly we've seen a rise in intimidation and attacks on serving politicians or people who want to be politicians in this country too. I mean, we have seen some of the great things about our democracy in recent weeks too, that people at the ballot box have been able to deliver change that they want and get the change in the country that they want to see. But we have to remember that underneath that, there has been this growing sense of insecurity and hate and attacks, especially at certain individuals, not to everybody, but at certain individuals. And it's something that we need to take action on.
What did your colleagues, some of your colleagues, I think, have had specific examples of what's happened to them during the campaign and the way they've had to change their behaviour. Can you give us a sense of what your colleagues have told you?
Well, some colleagues have had real difficulties. They've seen intimidation in the streets when campaigning. They've seen some intimidatory activity around and nearby polling stations. We've seen some deep fakes being shared online about individuals that have turned out to be completely wrong. We've seen misinformation shared that fuels kind of hatred and a dehumanising effect on individuals. Some colleagues have not had that experience at all. You know, this is a small number of cases, but where it is very worrying indeed. And that's why the Speaker, the Home Secretary, myself and others, we've taken the security of MPs and candidates incredibly seriously over the last few weeks and months, and thankfully we haven't seen any serious incidents in that time.
What actually, the Speaker has this weekend spoken about this, but what can you actually do? I mean, there's always going to be a problem because you, the politician, wants to meet and see the public face to face, but then there is the risk, and you've written about Joe Cox and also David Amos. We all know about. What can you actually do?
Well, look, I think fundamentally we have to be able to go about our democracy and our democratic processes free from fear and intimidation. And part of our democracy in this country as constituency MPs is to be out and about in our constituencies, is to hold surgeries, is to go to hustings, is to knock on doors, is to meet our individual constituents. And we've got to be able to maintain that insofar as possible. So, yes, there are security measures that have been put in place for individuals or for us collectively. We've got to educate people, I think, as well, so that they understand the difference between dis and misinformation and reality too. I think we need to take action on some of that being shared more quickly than we are able to do. And part of the theme of the new government under the Prime Minister's leadership, we want to try and restore trust in politics, show that through the ballot box, through people taking action politically and through democracy, we can deliver change for people. We've got this big mandate for change after an election, which was the most remarkable election in many ways, really restoring faith in the ballot box. But we now have a huge responsibility to deliver on that change, and that's what we've been doing over the last week or so. That's what we're going to be continuing to do every day, every week that passes. And the big legislative agenda we've got coming up this week in the King's Speech will build on that too.
I want to come back to that, but one of my colleagues has shown me something that you wrote after the death of Joe Cox, which I think is very apposite if I read it. You said the way we are all dehumanised, meaning politicians, means that that the journey from vile abuse online to real physical attacks is sadly getting shorter. But we must learn lessons, but the essence of our democracy should not be compromised. Does that mean that politicians are essentially doomed to just run this risk?
Well, I hope not. And we've got to all work together collectively as a society, not just as governments or as politicians ourselves, but as a society to really cling on to what is so great about our democracy, that people do have the power by voting, by engaging in democracy to bring about the change that they want, but also being informed about that as well. So not believing some of the things that they might see shared on WhatsApp or social media about an individual, which is completely wrong often.
Is there something here to be said about politicians' own behaviour, about the tone of politics, the way that MPs and leading politicians speak to and about each other?
I think there's probably is some truth in that, but I think that the tone the Prime Minister particularly has struck, and that is really flowing through the whole of this new government, is to be welcomed. His first message on the steps of Downing Street, governing for the whole country, in the interests of the whole country, no matter who people voted for, to take on that responsibility of government and to recognise that what people want to see happen is for us to follow through on the commitments we made, follow through on the promises that we made, deliver that real change that people voted for and that people want, and to go about changing the way we act and behave to ensure that we are a government of service. We've got the very highest standards of expectations for MPs, and we have seen, I'm afraid, an era of sleaze and scandal and cronyism, and we really want to turn the page on that. We are turning the page on that, and I think that's an important part of the debate.
Coming back to the attempt on Mr Trump's life, do you expect the Prime Minister to speak to Donald Trump at all?
Well, I know our ambassador in the US has already made contact with Trump's people. I'm sure those conversations will happen, and that the Prime Minister has expressed his solidarity with Donald Trump through social media and expressing that publicly, because we stand shoulder to shoulder. This is completely unacceptable, appalling attack, and is absolutely against everything that we stand for and believe in as free democracies.
What would you say now to a young person who might be interested in politics, who's watching this, has seen what's happened? What would you say to them about why would they put themselves at risk?
Well, what I would say is that these incidents are thankfully very rare on the whole, and that the job of a politician and being able to change people's lives and represent people and influence what happens is a huge honour. It really is. It's a huge responsibility. It's a huge honour and privilege. And there are a great deal of brilliant things about being an elected politician, whether that's a councillor or an MP or any other guise that people might want to consider in public service. And I would encourage people to do that. We do have to take care, and obviously we have seen a number of MPs standing down perhaps prematurely, and we've got to make sure that we uphold, as I said, I think in the aftermath of Joe's tragic death, we've got to uphold the essence of our democracy, which is talking to people and contact with the public.
Mrs Powell, I'm sorry we haven't had a chance to talk policy, but obviously today, more profound issues at stake. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Let's bring in our panel now, who are with me throughout the morning. The Labour peer Aisha, now Baroness Hazarika. The Conservative peer Paul, now Lord Goodman. And the chief political commentator at the newspaper, Kitty Donaldson. Aisha, first reactions.
Just real shock that this could have happened. Look, we know that the temperature in American politics is running pretty hot at the moment. We know this is an incredibly emotive election, and we know that there's a kind of a rawness and there's an edge to this particular contest. But for that to spill over into actual violence is really horrific. And wherever you sit on the political spectrum, you should be condemning this.
Paul?
Shocking, but not remotely surprising. This is the way we live now, and this is also America, where there is a long history of assassination attempts and successful assassinations on American presidents.
Indeed. Kitty?
My first reaction was actually political. I woke up this morning and saw the photo of him with his fist raised, and I thought, that guy's just won the election.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the photo is absolutely iconic, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think we'll come back to the issue of the impact on the election, but I think we can all agree it's changed everything.
Absolutely. And I don't think there's any kind of going back from this either. And, you know, there will now, of course, be lots of speculation about what the motive was. And, of course, Piketty is absolutely right. The raw politics will kick up a gear, but we're in a very, very different world today.
I presume it has, but I just wonder. I mean, Joe Cox was appallingly murdered just in the run-up to the referendum vote. And at the time, the reaction among many people was this will change the way the campaign is going. The vote will be for Remain. That didn't happen.
Just very briefly. Do we think that we're going to see the effects immediately?
That's a good question. And if you're a swing voter in the States, will this change your mind? And I think that's unknowable right now.
Okay. OK. It is 9 o'clock. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. Former US President Donald Trump has been shot in an assassination attempt. Shots were fired towards the former president during a rally in Pennsylvania, piercing the upper part of his right ear. He was rushed to safety after being hit, but is said to be doing well. A spectator was killed, and 2 people remain in a critical condition. Seconds after firing at Donald Trump, the suspected gunman was shot dead by Secret Service officers. The FBI have named the alleged shooter as 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks. Media in the US are reporting that the gunman was a registered Republican, the same party as Donald Trump. Well, our US correspondent Mark Stone has this report of what unfolded.
Donald Trump had been at the podium for just a few minutes in Butler, Pennsylvania, the latest of so many campaign rallies. This one familiar, like all the others. And then it happened.
Take a look at what happened.
Watch and listen again.
Take a look at what happened.
2 pops. Trump grabs his ear, then falls to the ground. Then a flurry. Then what appears to be one more shot, and the piercing screams. It's not clear at this point if he's been hit, how injured he might be. And all this is being broadcast live on American cable news.
Move! Go! Hawkeye's here. Hawkeye's here. Move to the stand. Stair, get ready. Stair, get ready. We ready?
The podium microphone is still on. The Secret Service agents confirm the shooter is down.
We're clear! We're clear! We're clear! Come on. Let me get my shoes. Let me get my shoes.
I got you, sir. I got you, sir.
Let me get my shoes, sir.
Hold that in your head. It's bloody.
So we gotta move to the car.
And then they begin to move the former president.
Watch out.
It was an attempt to assassinate Donald Trump. It had failed, and he recognized the need for immediate defiance. He was then bundled into his vehicle and away. The still images capture this extraordinary moment for America. Trump under fire, vulnerable, defiant. Quickly, a statement from the former president came. I was shot with a bullet that pierced the upper part of my right ear. I knew immediately that something was wrong in that I heard a whizzing sound, shots, and immediately felt the bullet ripping through my skin. Much bleeding took place, so I realized then what was happening, the former president said. And then, from his political foe, from President Biden, a hastily arranged address to the nation.
The bottom line is that the Trump rally was a rally that he should have been able to be conducted peacefully and without any problem. But the idea that there's political violence or violence in America like this is just unheard of.
The political reverberations from all this are hard to judge right now. They cannot be underestimated, but the immediate focus is the investigation. The witnesses will provide important information for the FBI, and they are now leading on it.
I was in the set of bleachers, the very far left of the podium where President Trump was speaking. I was there with friends. I heard several gunshots. The man beside me suffered a gunshot wound to the head, was instantly killed, fell to the bottom of the bleachers. Another woman looked like she got hit in the forearm or hand. And then at that point in time, it was rather chaotic at that point.
You don't like the guy, don't vote for him. Don't kill him. We love the guy. We're going to vote for him. You know, I mean, what is up with this violence? I mean, it's just terrible.
From Sky News analysis of the images from the scene, here's a picture of what happened. This is the spot where Donald Trump was speaking. The red zone is where the crowd was. It's thought the gunman was on this roof, beyond the secure perimeter of the rally, about 150 metres from the former president.
This evening we had what we're calling an assassination attempt against our former president, Donald Trump. It's still an active crime scene. As I mentioned, we have a number of agents on scene. We also are working closely with other federal agencies, our state partners, and our local police partners as well.
On the roof of an adjacent building is the weapon thought to have been used. Authorities say they've identified the dead gunman as a 20-year-old male, a young man who tried to change the course of American history. It will take time to process the impact of all this, the consequences for America and a society already fractured. Mark Stone, Sky News, in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Earlier, the FBI provided an update on the situation, confirming that they're treating it as an assassination attempt. They've identified the man they believe carried out the assassination attempt. That is 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks.
This evening we had what we're calling an assassination attempt against our former president, Donald Trump. It's still an active crime scene. As I mentioned, we have a number of agents on scene. We also are working closely with other federal agencies, our state partners, and our local police partners as well. We do not currently have an identified motive, although our investigators are working tirelessly to attempt to identify what that motive was.
I'm joined again now by our panel of Aisha Hazarika, Paul Goodman and Kitty Donaldson. Kitty, how do you think America will respond to this?
Interesting you should ask. I've got some relatives out in the States, and they were texting overnight saying, first of all, shock and concern about the state of politics in America. Secondly, that he'd effectively won. Donald Trump had effectively won in November. But then thirdly, and this was quite interesting, the kind of the conspiracy theories that started almost immediately after he was shot. Oh, you know, the guy, this was a setup or something. And I think that's a narrative we'll see playing out in the next few days.
I expect we will see that for the next few years.
Yeah,
It'll be, they never actually landed on the moon for years and years.
Yes, exactly, and all about JFK and so forth, yeah.
Paul, do you think that it's going to have an impact generally? Do you agree it'll have an impact on the race and maybe other races?
I think the moment everyone will remember, as we're saying, is the film and the photograph, because it's in that moment you find out something about the character of the person. And, Trump's response is to get up, literally rising from a situation that looked as though it could have been death, with his fist clench. And it's an image no one will forget. It's in that moment you find out about the person, just as we found out about Ronald Reagan when he was shot, and his response is to make jokes. Honey, I forgot to duck. And then, when he said to the surgeons, I hope you're all Republicans. It's the moment when you found out more about the character of Reagan, if you knew nothing about him, than at any other time. And this ferocious, fighting, sort of bristling character of Trump came out in that moment, and it will stamp itself upon this election and upon the way we think about Donald Trump.
Yeah, I don't know if we can call it up, but there is an image of him with the flag. There it is. Aisha, that's going to be it's going to be front and centre of the election campaign, isn't it?
Well, look, they say a picture tells 1,000 words. That is going to be probably the defining optic of this incredibly important election. And, Donald Trump is somebody who sort of trades on the brand of being the strong man, and there's probably no more proof of the strong man than what happened to him, to come up, to rise up, the blood dripping down his face, the fist, as Paul said, in defiance. That is going to capture the hearts and emotions of so many people. I think Kitty is absolutely right. I think this election was probably lost after the first debate, the dreadful debate where Joe Biden had a terrible night. I think the election is now won for Donald Trump. Now, I think what has happened is absolutely horrific. The idea that this is how you do your politics, and I think the conspiracy theories are going to absolutely fly. There is also, though, a really, really important consideration about what is going to happen to America if Donald Trump wins, and it does look like he's going to win. Are we even now going to be able to have a proper debate in American politics about what the choices are? I don't even think there's going to be space to have that debate because, you know, if you thought things were polarised before, you ain't seen nothing yet.
I think that the question that arises out of all this is one about tone in politics, because, you know, you can't draw a straight line from the invective between politicians. But I suspect that there's no doubt that there is something that's changed in the atmosphere, both there and to some extent here, Paul.
It's certainly true. I mean, here, of course, we've had 2 MPs killed in recent years. We had Joe Cox killed and David Amos also killed. And quite apart from people being murdered, there is, as you say, there's the whole tone and sort of miasma of the thing, with women MPs driven off social media like Twitter or X as it is now. Just having said all that, I just have a slight question mark about that thesis, because there is this history, as I was, you know, saying earlier, as we were discussing earlier, of violence against American presidents, the Reagan assassination attempt, the famous killing of Abraham Lincoln, the assassination attempt on Theodore Roosevelt. So there is sort of something in the air of American politics which makes this happen, and it happened even in the happier, sunnier, optimistic days of the 1960s with Kennedy. Doesn't just happen in these troubled times.
Having said that, we heard in the campaign recently here many MPs talking about the way they were being harassed at their homes and in the street. You cover this, Kitty. Do you think that there is a cause for extra concern?
Yes, it feels like the world's a lot more angry than it used to be. And I don't know whether that's true or whether it's more concentrated and people feel able to act. But going and standing outside Keir Starmer's home and protesting is just, you know, beyond. And it happened to Jacob Rees-Mogg, didn't it, a few years ago, and his children were harassed. Just unacceptable. And I think people, or the organisations that some of these people are part of, need to recognise that there are limits. But actually, you're just talking about the image, and you've put up another image, and in that one that you're showing now, the Trump, that's not quite so iconic, is it? He looks like a sort of slightly scared older guy there. So, you know, it'd be interesting which one sort of beams around the world.
Look, I think we should not be complacent about the risk to our politicians and people in public life. There is an absolutely horrible, dark, nasty anger that you see now, which is actually rewarded on social media. You know, the more awful you are about somebody, the algorithm kind of rewards that. We have become so emotively sort of polarised with this footballification of not just politics, but every single issue. It's a binary choice, you know, and if you don't support my side on one issue, we don't have to just disagree with you, we have to come after you and absolutely destroy you. Now, Paul has mentioned 2 MPs that lost their lives. Let's not forget, there are so many MPs now that have to have panic buttons in their house. They have to have routine police briefings about what to do if they're attacked when they're out with their children. Rosie Cooper was a former MP. There was a horrible far-right plot to kidnap her and murder her. Diane Abbott has a huge amount of abuse. The list goes on. And look, we live in a world where people, Kitty is right, people are very angry, and justifiably so. There are terrible things happening across the world. But for some reason, through social media, we have sent a signal to people saying, if you're really cross about something in the world, it's OK for you to threaten somebody here. You know, we know tensions are running really high on Gaza. I know so many MPs who have said that they have really genuinely feared for themselves or something happening to a member of their family.
Yeah. I wonder if we are giving mainstream media a free pass here. Are we part of the amplification? You know, talked about social media and everybody's got a view about that. But I wonder, looking at some of the people there who were clearly angry at some of the networks, particularly American networks, to what extent we are also part of this story?
Well, up to a point, I suppose that's true. And I think you can also ask some questions of the political parties. Just for myself, I wouldn't like to see a Britain in which the Conservatives, as it were, become the party of Israel and India, and Labour become the party of Pakistan and Palestine. You know, I like to see a mix of views within political parties rather than the political parties dividing up on tribal terms. Now, that's not happened yet, but I can see signs that it might. And I personally felt unhappy in the general election, looking at the way that some voters of one religion would be voting Conservative and others of another would be voting Labour or for independence. That's communalist politics, and it's a bad thing.
Yeah, Paul's been sort of mildly opaque about it, but let's make it plain. Hindus and Sikhs in this last election pretty much went wholesale against Labour and to the Conservatives, and in constituencies where there's a substantial Muslim vote, the Labour votes took an absolute whacking. Probably in constituencies where there were more than 20%, it went down between 15 and 20%. Constituencies where more than 10% Muslims went down 10%. Do you think...
Sorry, can I just make one thing? I think it's really important to say, yes, the Muslim vote in some Labour constituencies went down significantly, but a lot of Muslims still voted for Labour. I think it's very important not just to lump everybody together. I'm from a Muslim background. All Muslims do not think exactly the same. A lot of Muslims have the same concerns that other people do: cost of living crisis, public services, opportunity for their children. They're also quite economically marginalised as well. And then you have the Gaza overlay on top of that.
I'm sure that's right, Aisha, but I think the patterns, we were following it overnight, are so striking and so unusual, I think, for this country. It's hard to walk past it. You're completely right. You can't identify people just by their religion or indeed their ethnicity, but something seems to be happening which we haven't seen before. Kitty?
I think that's right, but just to go back to the point about violence against MPs, I've had private conversations, lots of female MPs, both on the Tory side and the Labour side, and in sort of hushed tones they whisper about the death threats and the threats to their children. And this stuff is never made, some of the times it's made public, but actually there's a lot of it behind the scenes because you sort of don't want to amplify it. You want to go on the social media or mainstream media and say, I've been subject to this, because it just encourages the crazies to do it more, I guess. So I think there needs to be a reset of how we treat people in public life. Okay. But then quite a lot of it is imported from America, and we've seen this today.
We'll come back to this in a second, but before we carry on our discussion, I just want to bring you Donald Trump's own words a few hours after the assassination attempt. He took to his Truth Media social account to issue this statement. He wrote, "I want to thank the United States Secret Service and all of law enforcement for their rapid response to the shooting that just took place in Butler, Pennsylvania. Most importantly, I want to extend my condolences to the family of the person at the rally who was killed, and also to the family of another person that was badly injured. It is incredible that such an act can take place in our country. Nothing is known at this time about the shooter, who is now dead. I was shot with a bullet that pierced the upper part of my right ear. I knew immediately that something was wrong in that I heard a whizzing sound, shots, and immediately felt the bullet ripping through the skin. Much bleeding took place, so I realised then what was happening. God bless America." In a moment, we look at the political ramifications of last night's attack.
So we're very excited at Square Cut, the production company I formed when I left Sky, because we think that America's really going to embrace cricket. They did very well in the recent World Cup. They made it through to the final 8. They beat Pakistan, and they're a coming force. And going on at the moment is a tournament called the MLC, Major League Cricket. It's a league made up of the likes of San Francisco, Washington, Seattle. 6 clubs play each other, then there's a knockout round, and by the end of July, there's a World Cup. And we're producing a podcast, US Cricket Daily, available on Amazon and Spotify and Apple, TikTok, Instagram, where you can look back on the day's play, and we look forward to the next day's game. Cricket is coming to America in a big way.
Do they understand it?
Yeah, they do. In fact,
because when you're out, you're in, and when you're in, you're out.
America played Canada in September 1844, 30 years before England played Australia.
Oh, OK.
America was ahead of the game, as they are in so many ways. They'd give them a run for the money on a good day. They've got some good players. And the big thing about the MLC, the Major League Cricket Tournament, is the players come from all over the world. They've got the likes of Pat Cummins, the Australian captain playing at the moment for the San Francisco team. Ponting is the coach of the Washington team. They're attracting good players. It's going to be an exciting league. T20 is the fastest growing format of cricket around the globe.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolution. It's our job to try to make sense of it all.
As we wake up this morning, America is still digesting last night's events. The first assassination attempt against a US presidential candidate since Ronald Reagan in 1981. And alongside providing some of the most harrowing political scenes you can imagine, it almost certainly upended the presidential race, with Republicans nationwide descending on Wisconsin for the National Convention starting tomorrow. Attending that conference is Greg Swenson, the chair of Republican Overseas UK, which represents the Republican Party members. He joins me now. Good morning, Mr. Swenson. What is the mood amongst party officials and activists tonight, I guess, for you?
Yeah, it's 3 a.m. here in Chicago. I'm on my way up to Milwaukee for the convention, Trevor. But I think the obvious reaction was just shock. You know, I happened to land at O'Hare when the news occurred, and my phone was ringing off the hook. Needless to say, but a lot of shock and a lot of relief that the president is okay. A lot of sympathy for the other victims. Who actually died in the assassination attempt. So, I think it's a lot of shock and everybody's just digesting it, but good news that he's okay. And I think that, obviously this is a huge moment in history in U.S. politics.
One small point. We're told that, or we understand, that the shooter was a registered Republican. Do you attach any significance to that?
No, not at all. I mean, it's so early. No, we don't know a whole lot about the shooter, and there's all kinds of speculation. But obviously, assassination attempts are usually made by, people that have real issues. So I wouldn't read into any of the political affiliation. And hopefully we'll learn some more about this in the next day or two. But, I think the fact that he's a registered Republican probably shouldn't mean much to anybody.
This, of course, is first and foremost a human event, and the first reaction is about everybody's safety and the ghastly fact that somebody or two people have died and others are in a critical state. But it is also a huge political event. What impact do you think this is going to have on the presidential race?
Well, if anything, it would probably be a positive for President Trump. You'll have some sympathy, obviously. You'll have the fact that, he showed some bravery. The way he reacted, I thought was great, not just on the scene, but also later on his Truth Social post. And so, hopefully that continues. And what I also would hope is that, the Trump derangement syndrome is dialed down a bit, and the rhetoric is dialed down a bit. And so, hopefully, perhaps this could even ultimately be a positive, not just for the campaign for President Trump, but also just for the political dialogue in general.
That's a very interesting point, Greg, because the statement that we've just heard from Mr. Trump doesn't correspond, let's put it that way, with the typical Donald Trump tweet or message with capitals and attacks on his opponents. What do you read into that?
Well, yeah, I think it's been pretty clear the last few months, Trevor, that the president is much more disciplined. The campaign in general is much more disciplined this time around compared to both 2016 and 2020. So I hope he continues with that. And I think that discipline is really well received and welcomed by those of us who are supporting Republicans in the elections, including President Trump. So, I think last night was another example of, his sort of newfound discipline in not, necessarily, elevating the rhetoric. And so, he's still got the personality. He does these rallies. He gets people fired up in a very positive way. But I think that, so far his reaction has been perfect.
We were given to understand that one thing that might have happened had the rally gone in the way it was supposed to, is that we might have heard who his vice presidential pick was going to be. Do you think that this event is going to have any impact on that decision?
I don't think so. I think, my guess is because the convention literally starts today. I would imagine he's made up his mind. I can't see any scenario where this would change anything about his decision. So, and the rumor right now is that it will be J.D. Vance, the senator from Ohio, but that's sort of unconfirmed and just kind of running around the rumor mill. But we'll see. I would imagine it'll be today or at the very latest, before Wednesday at the convention.
Yeah, Vance became famous for his book Hillbilly Elegy, which is a kind of memoir of somebody from the Rust Belt in America, very very Trump country. And in fact, I think he may have been the first politician to respond last night with a message of support and sympathy. But it was rather striking. We interviewed a couple of people from the Republican Party here on Sky last night, and I was very struck that they immediately pointed the finger at the Democrats and mentioned Joe Biden. In a way, is that the sort of tone that, from what you've been saying, you want your party to get away from?
Yeah, look, I think there's some heated or emotional responses that you'd expect after something like this. And, there'll be some finger pointing. I don't know that you could connect what I would imagine is a lone wolf criminal to any sort of campaign or movement. But again, I think that, you know, there is some merit to the argument that the Trump derangement syndrome is just way too elevated. And I think that it would be healthy for everybody to dial it down on both sides, but especially given that the Democrats have used, you know, the justice system. They've used every possible method to punish President Trump. And so, you know, hopefully that we can get back to arguing on issues and arguing on who the best candidate is, instead of all the sort of rabid hatred on both sides. But also, I think this could be a moment that maybe dials it down. But I understand the reactions, because there has been, you know, when you look back at the last year with the indictments and all the lawfare, I think there's some merit to that.
Just very briefly, of course, you're now, as you said, heading for the convention. Mr. Trump will no doubt appear there. What's your expectation of how the week will unfold?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I imagine the security will be ramped up a bit. I mean, the security would be very tight anyway, but I imagine it'll be elevated. I think there'll be a lot of shock today when people start arriving. But I think, you know, I think President Trump will arrive Wednesday or Thursday to, you know, a real heroic welcome. This is actually, you know, interesting timing. And I think if you look at the other party, the Democrat Party, you know, it might actually be a good time for, you know, to direct attention away from President Biden, who's been getting really beat up in the press. And you know, you're seeing the members of his own party, politicians here in the U.S. that have abandoned him or are calling for him to step down. You know, this might distract a little bit away from President Biden. And I thought that the convention was almost going to be overlooked to a certain degree because of the focus on President Biden and his cognitive issues and the chaos in his party. But this might actually, you know, distract from that and sort of renew the focus on the Republican Party this week because of the convention and because of what happened yesterday.
Greg Swenson, Republican Overseas UK, thank you very much for your
Thanks,
time
Trevor.
this morning.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
OK, still to come, more live reaction from a friend of Donald Trump, well known to this programme, Nigel Farage. Let's get some more reaction to overnight events, a little closer to home this time. Donald Trump was the reason Nigel Farage very nearly skipped running for Westminster in the general election. The Reform UK leader planned to support his presidential campaign stateside instead. But the newly elected MP for Clacton remains a firm friend of the former president, and I can speak to him now. Good morning, Mr. Farage.
Morning.
Your reaction to the events overnight?
Well, I was very upset when I heard the news late last night. I mean, Donald Trump has survived by a miracle, frankly, but one innocent man is dead. Two are fighting for their lives in hospital. So it is, it's horrible, and yet somehow not surprising.
It occurred to me that actually, if things had gone slightly differently last Thursday in our own election, you might have been at that rally because you have essentially done the warm-up for him at some of his rallies.
Yes, I almost certainly would have been there. You're absolutely right. And of course, it's the convention next week. And I've now decided I will fly out and see him next Thursday and listen to his acceptance speech. I will absolutely do that as a show of friendly solidarity. But I'm afraid, Donald Trump is not perfect. But some of the things that are allowed to be said about him are frankly appalling. And we'll always have real extremists or even terrorists on either side of the political divide. That's just a fact of life. But it almost becomes mainstream, for millions of people to hate political figures. And normally, this is not because of what they've said or done. It's because of what is said about them. And yes, we know social media plays a role in this, but I'm afraid mainstream media does as well. And Trevor, I've been through over a decade of this. In fact, I had a drink thrown at me as recently as last Wednesday.
We seem to have frozen. It seems to me we might have lost him. OK, we'll try and get back to Nigel Farage in a moment. Kitty, you were saying before we went to the break that there is an issue that you're thinking about. What do the Democrats do now about this?
Yes, and how they react in the next few days will be very interesting. I mean, we've already seen the reaction from the president saying everyone should...
Hold on a second, hold the thought, because I think we have Nigel Farage back. OK, Nigel, yeah, you were saying, of course, that you yourself have faced some of this. I suppose the issue here is the one about the way we talk about and to each other. To what extent do you think politicians, and I include you here, have some responsibility for the polarisation that's taking place?
Yeah, but I think the main problem is liberal intolerance. Liberal intolerance that runs through the education system, that runs through mainstream media, that is commonplace on X, formerly Twitter. Look, that's not to say there aren't people on the right who don't say vile, abusive things. There are. But I'm afraid there is increasingly too much of one side on this.
Have you been in touch at all with Mr. Trump or his people?
Yes, I have. I sent a text to Donald himself, obviously. I'm not expecting a rapid answer. He's got more to think about. But no, I have spoken to the team. Obviously everybody is horrified. And the problem is, how do you go on campaigning? I mean, I faced this in this general election. Milkshake chucked in my face, cement thrown at me, stones thrown at me. And you start to think, well, can I carry on campaigning? And of course, for Donald Trump, the rallies are the absolute lifeblood. I mean, anything up to 50,000 people attend these events. If somebody with a high-powered rifle from hundreds of yards away can do this, the team have got a lot to think about. If I know Trump, he'll probably just continue regardless. But the impact of this on our politics as a whole is very real. And think, John Major went around the country, stood on a soapbox, campaigned, won a general election by doing it. Could a leading politician even do that now?
If I can ask you, in a way, as a fellow TV anchor rather than as a politician, what do you assess this event? What effect do you think this event's going to have on the presidential race? Is this now Trump's race to lose?
Well, I thought it was for some time, to be honest with you. What I hope, of course, is that this proves to be a pivotal moment in not just American but Western politics, and that we start to be a little bit more tolerant of people who have different points of view. That is what I hope comes out of it, but I won't hold my breath.
I don't know if you've seen President Trump's statement, but we were just remarking that it is, in some ways, if you like, at the cooler end of the Trump spectrum, in the sense of being measured, referring to the other people who have died or been injured in this. Are we likely to see a new, more disciplined Trump?
To be honest with you, we've seen that, I think, throughout much of this campaign already. This is not the Trump of 2016. I saw that statement and I thought, yeah, he's thinking to himself, this is absolutely awful, but I too have a responsibility. I don't want my supporters seeking out revenge attacks or anything of the kind. And that's why he worded it the way that he did. As I say, I hope, hey, even Joe Biden used his first name, Donald. One hopes that we start to talk a bit more about policy, what the differences are, and there's a little bit less inflammatory language. And, you can hear it on CNN every single day if you want to, but let's hope that changes.
Bringing this back home, and forgive me, I neglected to congratulate you on your own recent victory. Now you're in Parliament with 4 colleagues. Do you think this holds lessons for the way that we behave? You yourself have already had a little bit of, if I can put it this way, ruckus on your remarks on the former Speaker.
Well, come on, my remarks on the former Speaker was I was contrasting this Speaker to him and saying that I thought that Lindsay had brought great dignity and neutrality back to the role. I'm not ashamed of saying that.
OK, and as a new Member of Parliament, what would you like Lindsay Hoyle and I spoke this morning to Lucy Powell, the new leader of the House of Commons. What do you think they ought to be thinking about in relation to MPs' safety, candidate safety, and so on? Because it sounds like this will be a major issue for our politics in the years to come.
Yeah, Lindsay Hoyle did a big interview in The Telegraph yesterday in which he said that MP safety was the one thing that keeps him awake at night. And that focus will be even sharper, I think, after what happened, albeit in America, overnight. I have to say, I find it astonishing that members of Parliament can walk out across the square and get on the London Underground. I find it astonishing that, frankly, more MPs aren't attacked. That is how unpleasant so much of the narrative is. It's become deeply personal, and I'm afraid, and a lot of the public hate this, but if you want people to stand for public office, we're going to have to protect them properly.
Nigel Farage, thank you so much for your time this morning. Back with our panel next.
And now it's coming from both sides and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
The biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it. It got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits going in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa!
Close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Back with our panel, Aisha Hazarika, Paul Goodman and Kitty Donaldson. Kitty, I was asking you about how you think the Democrats might respond to this.
Well, in the first place, President Biden needs to look statesmanlike, which he has done already, and he's condemned the violence, and that's absolutely right. But I do think that there will be even more pressure on him to release his delegates now and to let there be a leadership race that doesn't include him. And whether Kamala Harris can, A, takes that position, seems most likely outcome, and B, whether she can beat Donald Trump, it seems to me increasingly unlikely.
It feels, I mean, does anybody think that actually after this, any Democrat could emerge?
Yes, I think you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. It's supremely unlikely that any Democrat can beat Trump. But the Biden question is still there. He could go. Someone else could come in. We have very short-term concentration now. It's most unlikely anyone other than Trump will be president when the change comes, but you never know.
I think in practice the only person who could really come in is Kamala Harris, partly because of the money.
Yes.
There's $90 million pledged to Biden-Harris, and nobody else can access that money.
She has to be on the ticket to get access to that money. But look, I mean, even the conversation we've just had here now, right, we're talking about it's highly likely that Trump is going to win. And a big question here for this new Labour government is if Trump does win, and that's looking increasingly likely, how are they going to navigate that? And I think it's really interesting, the sort of pivot that David Lammy, our new Foreign Secretary, has done, because he has used some very critical language of Donald Trump in the past. But he is starting to build bridges with the Trump team. He did a big trip to Washington recently. When he came back, I did an event with him. There was actually some senior Democrat people there as well. And he told the assembled audience, yes, of course, I had very good meetings with the Biden team, but I also had very good meetings with the Trump team. And there was a bit of a frisson in the audience because they're quite liberal, progressive people who clearly don't love Trump. But he said, look, I have got, as a future foreign secretary, I have got to start building relationships with Trump's team. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see the sort of Labour Party kind of pivot to start having some kind of functional relationship. I mean, David Lammy said to me that from the conversations he had had this time, the Trump organisation was so much better than it was back in 2014. 2015, 2016, they were much more organised, they were much more focused. The data they had was really, really precise and really clear. And, Tim Shipman from the Sunday Times did an interesting write-up of his visit and said that in many ways David Lammy was hoping to almost become to have good relations with Team Trump, almost be a kind of Trump whisperer, if you like. I mean, as you say, Trump's got a long memory. He does remember stuff that people have said about him.
Who bears grudges.
Yes, and holds them. He nurses his wrath, as they say in Scotland.
Yes, but the expectation now, I guess, at the Labour High Command is that this is the person they're most likely to have to deal with.
And they're going to have to have a grown-up, respectful relationship, despite what a large chunk of the Labour Party thinks about Donald Trump.
Kitty, a big signal of how they deal with Donald Trump is a story that you've been pursuing, which is who they put in the embassy on is it Massachusetts Avenue in Washington?
Absolutely. So Rishi Sunak had told Tim Barrow, who's the current National Security Advisor, that effectively the job was his and he would become the UK's ambassador to Washington. And one of the very first acts of the Labour government was to come in and say, sorry, mate, you're not having it, basically. And what happens to him next, no one seems quite clear. And then the sort of next question is to who does get that job, and do you make it a career civil servant? And I think there's a lot of people in the Foreign Office who think that, this is the prime posting. And if they've worked for years in some sort of dusty outpost somewhere, that actually, they should earn that right to be in Washington. Or do you put a political appointee in? And there's several names in the frame. There's David Miliband, former Foreign Secretary, Peter Mandelson, who's in the House of Lords, and Cathy Ashton as well. And it'd be interesting where the kind of pendulum swings now and who's now the favoured candidate and whether they can be an effective Trump whisperer too.
You have to be very old to remember this, but the Callaghan government in the 1970s appointed a man called Peter Jay, who in fact was James Callaghan's son-in-law, who was clearly a straightforward political appointment. So this particular appointment has always been... It's always been at the whim, and you could a signal of what our relationship with the Americans is.
I think when a new government comes in like this, and the government is of one complexion, it's a left-wing government, and you have the possibility of a right-wing government in America, there's a lot of hopeful mood music and talk about people being able to work out a relationship between the two, what David Lammy may be up to. What happens if it gets really tough? I'm just thinking back to what happened when we had Tony Blair in office, and you had George W. Bush going one way, and the hearts and souls of the Labour Party going the other. What happens if you replicate that situation with Donald Trump? Now, it's true, Trump's been a great deal more disciplined. I think your Republican guest was quite right about that. He's running a very disciplined campaign. But truthfully, most of us have no idea what a Trump foreign policy would be like. And in the past, it's been highly emotive. So he looks at some pictures he doesn't like from Syria and decides he's going to bomb Syria. He decides he's had enough of certain Iranian leaders and launches a strike. He decides, on the other hand, he wants to have a completely different relationship with North Korea. You don't know where it will go, and this will be really, or could be, really very difficult for Labour.
Let me just bring you quickly some of the reaction from British political leaders. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, released the following statement. I'm appalled by the shocking scenes at President Trump's rally. We send him and his family our best wishes. Political violence in any form has no place in our societies, and my thoughts are with all the victims of this attack. And Rishi Sunak said, horrified by the attack in Pennsylvania, in a democracy, you must be able to speak freely and stand for what you believe in. Violence and intimidation must never be allowed to prevail. My thoughts and prayers are with President Trump and the victims of this appalling attack. Aisha, everybody is having to do a really quick pivot. And, it's easy to be cynical about it, but this is important for the relationships between states, what we do about the Middle East, what we do about Ukraine. There's a reset going on already, isn't there?
There's a huge reset. I mean, this election in America is very important for America. It's important for the whole world, particularly now as you're seeing these kind of different currents in geopolitics. You are seeing a new alignment. It isn't just the dominance of the West anymore, and you're seeing the rise of the global South. You're seeing new powerful alliances. Just look at, Prime Minister Modi getting a very warm reception from President Putin. These kind of plates are shifting, and the global politics are as important as our domestic politics now. And I think Paul is right. I think the path ahead, if it is President Trump, will be unpredictable. We know that foreign policy is often a flashpoint, particularly for a Labour government. But I think what you have seen from Keir Starmer very resolutely is a sort of country first, party second message. And I think that even if there are very, very difficult moments on foreign policy, and there will be a lot of pressure from Labour activists and the left, I think Keir Starmer and David Lammy will think firstly, what is in the interest of the United Kingdom as a whole?
Just 5 seconds each. Are we going to see a different Trump now?
Oh, I think it's the same sort of, revised, reformed, rather more cautious Trump.
I mean, he is who he is, right?
Thank you all very much. That's it from us this week. See you back next Sunday.
Good morning, this is Sky News Today. It's 10 o'clock. The top stories.
Take a look at what happened.
The moment a gunman tried to assassinate Donald Trump, the former president ducked to the ground before being rushed away by Secret Service agents. He was then bundled off the stage, but raised a fist to his supporters before being taken away in an armoured vehicle. Donald Trump later confirmed on social